My parents used me as free childcare, then expected me to keep paying for my siblings, but I was done. When people hear about kids being forced to grow up too fast, they usually picture some Dickensian orphan struggling to survive. But I wasn't an orphan. I had two living, breathing parents. And yet, from the moment I was old enough to hold a baby bottle, I stopped being a daughter and became free labor. See, my parents, Sandra 52F and Greg 54M, loved the idea of a big, happy family. You know, the kind you see in those holiday movies where siblings giggle around the dinner table and parents snap pictures of their adorable chaos. The ones that get stopped in public by strangers saying, "Wow, 6 kids. What a blessing." And my parents ate that up. The status, the admiration, but what they didn't love, the actual work that came with having a big family. They had kid after kid, 6 in total, without a single thought about how they'd raise them. And instead of doing the hard part themselves, they just looked at me, their eldest, and decided there. That one, she'll handle it. No discussion. No asking if I was okay with it. No choice. I wasn't their daughter. I was their built-in babysitter, unpaid maid, and emotional punching bag. While other kids were playing outside, I was rocking a colicky baby back and forth, praying he'd stop screaming before my mom got home and accuse me of not trying hard enough. While my classmates went to birthday parties, I was stuck at home, spoon-feeding mashed peas to a fussy toddler who'd throw them right back at me. And while my friends talked about their favorite TV shows, I wouldn't know a damn thing about them because I was too busy changing diapers and wiping noses. If I ever dared complain, my parents would shut me down instantly. You live under our roof. You follow our rules. Babysitting isn't a job. It's just being a good daughter. You should be grateful we let you stay here rent-free. Grateful? For what? For missing out on everything normal kids got to experience? For never getting to just be a kid? Because, let's be real, I wasn't just helping out every once in a while. No, I was raising those kids. My parents? They acted like teenagers on spring break. Every Friday and Saturday night, they went out to bars, leaving me home alone with screaming toddlers. At least once a year, they took vacations, just the two of them, while I stayed behind, managing a house full of little kids who weren't even mine. They never once cared about how much I was struggling. It wasn't just exhausting, it was suffocating. I had no social life, no hobbies, no dreams of my own. If I asked to hang out with friends, the answer was always the same. What friends? You have responsibilities. If I even thought about doing something for myself, my mother would guilt-trip me so hard I'd feel sick. Oh, so you'd rather go out and have fun while your poor siblings suffer? Do you even love them? The worst part? I did love them. I loved those kids more than I loved my parents. And that's what made it all so much harder, because no matter how much I resented my parents, I could never bring myself to resent my siblings. They were just as trapped as I was. And the older I got, the worse it became. By the time I was 14, I could change a diaper in the dark, one-handed, half asleep. By 16, I wasn't just babysitting, I was basically a second mom. By 18, I had given up on college because someone had to be home to watch the kids. And did my parents care? Of course not. When I tried to talk about my future, my dad laughed in my face. College? What for? Women should focus on family, not wasting money on some fancy degree. When I wanted to get a part-time job so I could have some money of my own, my mom shut that down immediately. You're too busy helping at home. The kids need you. And if I ever dared ask for money, we feed you, don't we? What else do you need? Meanwhile, they always found money for themselves. My mom got new clothes and salon visits every month. My dad bought himself a brand new truck just because he felt like it. But me? I wore hand-me-downs until they literally fell apart. I was an unpaid servant in my own home. Nobody cared. Not my parents. Not the relatives who had to know what was happening but turn a blind eye. Not even the teachers at school who must have noticed how exhausted I was, how I never joined clubs, never had time for after-school activities, never hung out with anyone. Nobody cared that I was drowning. And for the longest time, I thought that was just how life was. I thought I had no way out. But then, one day, I overheard something that changed everything. The night everything changed started like any other. I was scrubbing dishes while my parents lounged in the living room, scrolling through their phones. The kids were asleep, the house was quiet, and I was running through my usual mental checklist, prepping school lunches, making sure homework was done, setting up breakfast for the next morning. And then I heard my mother's voice. She was on the phone, chatting with one of her friends. At first, I wasn't really paying attention, but then I heard something that made my hands freeze in the soapy water. She was talking about me, not in a worried way, not in a parental way. She was mocking me. She told her friend that once I had kids of my own, I'd finally understand why she had done what she did. That I'd look back and thank her for teaching me how to be a good mother. That one day, I'd happily do the same for them when they got older. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. It wasn't just about the past. They didn't just see me as free childcare for my siblings. They expected me to take care of them too. They had never planned to let me go. I wasn't just their built-in babysitter. I was their retirement plan. And in that moment, I realized if I didn't leave, I never would. I was done. I was getting out. I spent the next several months secretly saving up money. Every spare dollar I could find, I tucked away. I took on small online jobs, doing whatever I could to build a little bit of financial security. It wasn't much, but it was something. I found a cheap apartment and a job. Nothing glamorous, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was that it was mine. And then, one night, when my parents were out partying like they always did, I packed my bags. I left a note on the kitchen counter. Not because they deserved an explanation, but because I wanted them to know that this time, they couldn't stop me. At first, after I left, there was silence. No calls, no messages, no desperate attempts to drag me back. Just silence. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, they had finally realized how badly they had treated me. That they had taken a step back and seen all the years of unpaid labor, all the sacrifices I'd made for them, and finally understood why I had to go. But of course, that was just wishful thinking, because after a few weeks, the messages started rolling in. At first, they were framed as concern. My mother sent long, dramatic texts saying that the little ones were devastated without me, that they cried for me at night, that they asked where I had gone and why I had left them. She made sure to paint the picture as painfully as possible, trying to claw at my guilt, trying to make me feel like I had abandoned my siblings. My father's approach was different. He wasn't concerned. He was angry. He told me I had no right to leave like that after everything they had done for me, this was how I repaid them. He called me selfish, ungrateful, heartless. He demanded that I come home and do the right thing. Neither of them ever asked how I was doing. Not once. I ignored them. I didn't respond. I refused to let them guilt me back into their house, back into their endless cycle of manipulation and control. But when they realized that I wasn't biting, they changed tactics. The next messages weren't about my siblings. They were about money. Suddenly, they needed my help. Apparently, my absence had created a problem for them, one they weren't prepared for. I had been the one running the house. I had been the one cooking, cleaning, taking care of the kids. And without me, things had fallen apart fast. I could almost picture it. The house turning into a disaster zone, my siblings struggling to get ready for school, my mother realizing that making dinner wasn't as effortless as she had made it seem. My father, who had spent years pretending I was useless, now discovering just how much of a role I had played in keeping the family functional. But instead of admitting that they had been wrong, instead of apologizing for treating me like a servant, they went straight to demanding that I fix it. My mother sent me a message saying that money was tight now, that they had always relied on me to do things, and without me there, they had to start paying for help. Babysitters, house cleaners, things they had never bothered with before. And now they were struggling. She told me I owed them, that after everything they had done for me, the least I could do was send them a little money. At first, it was framed as a simple favor. She asked if I could send just a little to help with school supplies for my siblings. She said she hated to ask, but she knew I would understand because I had always been the responsible one. When I ignored that, she got more desperate. The next message was about rent. Apparently, they were having trouble paying bills. My father had overextended himself financially, probably spending money on things he wanted, not what the family actually needed. And now they were struggling to keep up. This time, my mother wasn't even pretending to ask. She told me that as their child, it was my duty to help my family when they needed it, that I owed them for raising me, that it was my turn to take care of them. I felt sick reading it, because for a split second, I almost did feel guilty. Not for them, never for them, but for my siblings. The ones I had practically raised, the ones who had relied on me because they had no one else. I wanted to help them, but I knew the truth. If I sent money, it wouldn't go to my siblings. It wouldn't be used for food or school supplies. It would go straight into my parents' pockets. They would take it and continue living the way they always had, without responsibility, without consequences, without ever acknowledging what they had done to me. So I ignored the messages. And that's when they did something I never could have imagined. When I saw the bank alert, I thought it was a mistake. It had to be. I had been so careful with my money. After spending my entire life without a single cent to call my own, I guarded every dollar like it was my lifeline because it was. So when I saw a charge I didn't recognize, my stomach immediately twisted into a knot. My heart was pounding as I opened my banking app and scanned through the transactions. But then I saw something that made the panic fade into something colder, heavier. The charge wasn't on my debit card. It wasn't on any card I had. It was on a credit card I had never opened. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. My name was on the account, but I had never applied for it. I had never even received a card. Then, like a punch to the gut, realization hit. My parents. They had gotten a hold of my social security number. They had used my identity to open a credit card and were now racking up charges under my name. I felt sick. I had spent months cutting them out, ignoring their manipulations, refusing to send them money, standing my ground. And this was their response. They hadn't just guilt-tripped me. They hadn't just begged and pleaded. They had stolen from me. I don't even remember dialing my mother's number. 1 second, I was staring at my phone in stunned disbelief, and the next, I was listening to her voice on the other end, sounding entirely too casual, like she hadn't just committed a felony against her own daughter. I demanded an explanation. I expected, at the very least, some kind of excuse. Maybe a desperate attempt to cover it up, to deny it, to shift the blame onto someone else. Maybe even an apology. But no, she didn't even pretend to feel bad. She told me to relax. She said it was just a little money, that I shouldn't be making such a big deal out of it. She actually laughed, like I was being dramatic for being upset that my own parents had committed identity theft against me. My father, who must have been in the room with her, grabbed the phone and told me I was overreacting. He said that as their daughter, it was my duty to help them. That if I had been a good daughter, I wouldn't be acting like this. They truly believed it. They genuinely thought that after everything they had done to me, I still owed them. I couldn't breathe. I had spent my entire life giving up everything for them. My childhood, my teenage years, my dreams, my time, my entire existence. And the second I dared to claim something for myself, the second I finally escaped, they took that too. I hung up on them. I couldn't listen to another word. I was shaking so badly I could barely type as I started looking up what to do. How to report identity theft. How to freeze my credit. How to protect myself from my own parents. It felt surreal, like something that should have been happening to someone else. Some stranger on the internet. Some cautionary tale. Not me. Not the girl who had already been used and discarded and drained of every last drop of patience and love she had once had for them. But it was me, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I called the bank and told them everything. I reported the fraud. I shut down the account. I filed a police report, not because I wanted them arrested, but because I wanted to make sure they could never do it again. And then I did the hardest thing I had ever done. I sent them one final message. Not an argument. Not an attempt to get them to understand. Not a plea for change. Just a statement. A fact. I told them I was done. That I was not their parent. That I was not their ATM. That I was not their daughter anymore. And then I blocked them. Every number. Every email. Every social media account. Gone. For the first time in my life, there was silence. No guilt tripping. No angry messages. No demands. Just silence. I should have felt relief. But instead, I felt empty. Because no matter how awful they had been still been my parents. And cutting them off, truly and permanently, felt like sawing off a part of myself. But I had no choice. If I had stayed, if I'd let them back in, they would have taken everything from me. In the months after I cut my parents off, I expected the guilt to creep back in. I had spent so many years living under their manipulation that I thought, eventually, some part of me would start doubting my decision. Maybe I'd wonder if I had been too harsh. Maybe I'd feel a tug of obligation, a need to reach out, just to see if they had learned anything. But the guilt never came. Instead, I felt something I had never known before. Peace. For the first time in my life, I woke up without dreading the day ahead. I went to work and came home to an apartment that was mine and mine alone, where I didn't have to clean up after anyone, where I didn't have to tiptoe around someone else's needs, where I didn't feel like I owed every moment of my time to someone else. It was strange at first, the stillness of it all. For years, I had lived in chaos, screaming kids, demanding parents, a house that was never quiet, never mine. Now I had silence, and it was beautiful. But my parents, they weren't doing so well. At first, they probably thought they could handle it. They likely assumed they could pick up where they left off, shoving the responsibility onto someone else, finding another way to keep their cushy, work-free lifestyle. But the problem was, there was no one else. I had been the foundation of that household, the glue that held everything together, the one making sure everything got done. And without me, the cracks started to show. I didn't hear about it right away. After all, I wasn't speaking to them anymore. But little by little, I started getting bits and pieces from the only people I hadn't cut off, my younger siblings. They were still stuck in that house, still at the mercy of my parents, but they were older now. They were teenagers, not helpless little kids anymore. And with me gone, they were starting to see the truth for themselves. At first, my parents tried to maintain control the same way they always had, through guilt, through manipulation, through sheer force of will. They told my siblings that I had abandoned them, that I never really loved them, that I had left because I was selfish. They did their best to paint me as the villain, hoping that my siblings would believe them. But the thing was, my siblings knew me. I had been the one who tucked them in at night. I had been the one who helped them with their homework. I had been the one who comforted them when they were scared, who made sure they had everything they needed, who raised them when our parents couldn't be bothered. They might have been young, but they weren't stupid. And as the weeks turned into months, they started to realize something. Without me, everything was falling apart. The house, which I'd spent years keeping clean and organized, was a mess. My parents had never lifted a finger before, and they weren't about to start now. Dishes piled up in the sink, laundry went unwashed, the floors were covered in clutter. The kids weren't getting to school on time. They weren't eating proper meals. They were left to fend for themselves while my parents continued their usual routine, going out, spending money they didn't have, pretending nothing had changed. And the resentment started to build. I started getting texts from my siblings. At first, they were cautious, hesitant. They didn't want me to think they were on our parents' side. But soon, the messages became angrier. They were furious. Not at me, at them. The real breaking point came when my youngest brother, only 12 at the time, got sick. Normally, I would have been the one to take care of him. I would have made sure he had medicine, that he stayed hydrated, that he was looked after. But I wasn't there. My parents didn't care. He told me, weeks later, that he had been running a fever so high he could barely move. He had asked my mother for help, and she told him to stop being dramatic. My father ignored him completely. It was my 16-year-old sister who ended up taking care of him. She was the one who brought him medicine, who stayed up all night watching him, who made sure he was okay. And in that moment, she realized something. She was me now. She was the one they were going to dump everything on. She was the next in line, and she refused. That was when the rebellion started. One by one, my siblings started pushing back. My sister stopped doing the housework. She refused to be my replacement. She started calling my parents out, asking them why they weren't the ones taking care of their own children. My brothers started ignoring their guilt trips. When my parents tried to blame me for everything, they shut it down. And the more they pushed back, the angrier my parents became. Because my parents needed someone to control. They couldn't stand the idea of their children thinking for themselves, of them seeing through their manipulation, of them choosing themselves instead of bending to their will. They fought it as hard as they could. They screamed, they punished, they did everything they could to regain control. But it was already too late. The damage had been done. The illusion was shattered. My siblings saw them for who they really were. And one by one, they started planning their own escapes. The day my sister turned 18, she left. She packed her bags and walked out, just like I had. And she moved in with me. For the first time in years, we were together again. I had spent so long feeling like I had abandoned them, like I had left them to fend for themselves. But now my sister was safe. She was free. And over the next few years, my brothers followed. The second they were old enough, they left. My parents had nothing. They had built their entire lives around using their children as free labor, around manipulating and controlling us. But they never considered what would happen if we all left. If we all refused to come back. They lost everything. They had no one to take care of them, no one to clean up their messes, no one to keep their household running. And they deserved every bit of it. It's been years now. My siblings are grown. They have their own lives, their own jobs, their own places. We have each other. And our parents? They're alone. They've reached out, of course. They've sent messages, tried to reconnect, tried to guilt us into taking care of them in their old age. But none of us respond. We made it out, and we're never going back.